Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76, and together, by going into the Word of God, we are decoding the deception. And tonight, we are picking up right where we left off in the Gospel of Matthew. So let's jump in. We are at Matthew 23, verse 13. Just a reminder, there are 28 chapters in the Gospel of Matthew. So we are winding down. We are getting close to the end, and things intensify as in any story. And this it is a story. It's all true. But in this story, things are intensifying. And we're at this section, been building up to it for some time, the Seven Woes, And I'm going to go back and read just the last two verses of the section that precedes, because it's very important. Before he turns and pronounces this judgment on the scribes and the Pharisees, before he does that, he turns to the crowd and he makes sure that they understand the view they should have of their leaders. And he's telling them to respect their leaders, etc. But he does put out at the end the standard to which he holds leaders, those who put themselves out there, those who accept the mantle that I am a preacher, a teacher of the Word of God. They need to do this. The greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. If you want to look for a great leader, look for a humble leader. And you have to be humble to preach the Word of God, because you are proclaiming the gospel, the message of salvation, but you are also, with that, proclaiming God's law, and that law condemns the one who is proclaiming it. We're all in the same boat. We are all captive and burdened with sin. It is our common struggle. So the one who would teach and preach and proclaim and speak for the Lord and say, "Thus saith the Lord," has to have a humble attitude about that. We could talk about that quite a bit, but we don't have time. We've got 7 woes to get through, and I want to get through them all. Note that there are 7 woes. Jesus didn't just get tired and quit after 7 because his voice gave out. Not the case. It is important that there are 7 woes. We've seen that number a couple of times in the book of Matthew, that Jesus does things in sevens. And there are 7 because that is the ultimate divine number. 4 is the number of the earth. 3 is the number of God. You bring the two together and you get 7. Just like there are 7 days in a week, there is an idea of completion. Point being, Jesus leaves nothing out when he proclaims this condemnation. He leaves nothing out. This is really a no holds barred. And as we hear this, think of that day, the last day, the great and terrible day, great for believers, terrible for everybody else. That great and terrible day when every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. Even those who pierced him will be there bowing before him. Those who had him crucified will be bowing before him. And we get just a little feel for what that condemnation, that judgment is like. I want to point a couple things out before we jump in, and I'm going to read all the way through it, and then we're going to come back. There are 7 woes. 7 times Jesus says, woe. Woe is a proclamation of judgment. It says something bad is coming, and it's in the Old Testament repeatedly. It's in the book of Revelation, where that eagle flies and says, woe, woe, woe to those who live on the earth. That proclamation of judgment on unbelievers. It's repeated in the prophets. Woe to, and it's in the New Testament. It's 7 times here. They understood what he was saying. That's the point. No one had to explain to them what woe meant. It was divine proclamation of judgment on rebellious and sin-hardened people. It was a warning. And at this time, because we're on this side of the grave, these guys were still kicking. They were still walking. They were still fogging a mirror. They still had a chance. And don't forget that part of the power of this proclamation of the law is what the proclamation of the law always is about. Its first aim is to incite fear, to work fear in the sinner so that they recognize their plight and turn to the Lord and hear that gospel message. If you don't know you're a sinner, you look at the gospel and say, yeah, that's nice, I don't need it. We dally. So in addition to 7 woes, 6 times he calls them hypocrites, which is the most powerful judgment. It's the last thing anyone who puts themselves out there as a proclaimer of truth, as a shepherd of the sheep, as a servant of God, the last thing you want to be is a hypocrite. So 6 times he calls them hypocrites. 5 times he calls them blind. He calls them blind fools. He calls them blind leaders of the blind. 5 times he says they're blind. They can't see what's right in front of them. Another thing, it's telling someone who is supposed to have judgment that they have no judgment. They're blind as a bat. He tells them they're children of hell. He calls them serpents, a brood of vipers, and he says they can't escape being, he doesn't say they can't, but how can you escape being sentenced to hell? This is powerful stuff. Powerful, powerful stuff. He's not messing around. We'll read, and we're going to go all the way through. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte. That's a convert to Judaism. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside also may be clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus, you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly, I say to you, all of these things will come upon this generation. I'm no actor, but I did try to read that with some of the energy that Jesus had to have had in his voice, in his presentation, as he preached this sermon of condemnation to the scribes and the Pharisees. And he's picking on the scribes and the Pharisees. He doesn't mention the Sadducees. It doesn't mean they get off scot-free. It all applied to them as well. But the ones who were out front, who were out in the community all the time, were the scribes and the Pharisees. So let's go through this. How did they shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces? They did that by coming up with all their own rules. It was always about them. It was always about them being in control. What does bureaucracy always become? People being in control. Why do churches, either individual congregations or church bodies, go off the rails and lose their way? Because they become about control and the system and continuing it, and they forget what they are about. It is hard to prevent that from happening in this sinful world, and this teaches us that it is nothing new. And I'm not talking about everything that's in here, because there is so much and we are limited for time. But if you're all about bringing people into your system, into your box, where you've got control, where you've got power, where you've got the ability to control everything, then those people who come into that system, are they going to know the Lord? Are they going to know the way of salvation, and that the good news of God's grace through Jesus Christ is what it's all about, and we're free from all the law? No, it's going to be very easy for them to be trapped into the same system of hypocrisy. We'll talk more about the control thing later. Blind guides, this stuff about the temple. First of all, let's talk about blind guides, because blind guides, and when I think of a guide, I'm sorry, I can only think of one thing. I was a missionary. My family and I, we were missionaries in Peru. And my guide all the time was Edison. Edison took me around. Edison made sure the gringo didn't get lost in the Andes Mountains and die. That was Edison's job. He went with me all the time. He was also a pastor, but when I was with him, he was just making sure I was okay. This is a picture that I took, and this is the road to a place called Yamak. And you can see you don't want a blind guide leading you. You don't want to be out there at night without your lights on, because this road you can see is very, very treacherous. Blind guides get people killed. Okay. It's true in the Andes Mountains. It's true spiritually, because there are all kinds of places you can go astray. There are all kinds of places where you can take a misstep and down you go, tumbling head over heels down the side of a mountain or off the side of a cliff spiritually. And you've all seen it happen. You've possibly had it happen to you, and God's grace brought you back. He reached out with his shepherd's staff and pulled you back. It's dangerous stuff. Now, I'm not going to go through, we could spend the whole half hour on the particulars of this swearing by this and that part of the temple, and how that tied into what actually went on and how they did things then. The big point is that they took the material, gold, gift, money, and made it the important thing, material over spiritual, material over spiritual. Does that sound like a messed up faith system? Yes, it does. But if anyone swears by the temple, you can go through all this stuff, and even for them, it got confusing. And there's a simple puzzle. There's a simple way to decode bureaucracy. If you understand this, that bureaucracy, and this is bureaucracy that Jesus is condemning. Bureaucracy is all about complication. Make it as complicated as can be. And then that brings about confusion. And if there's complication and if there's confusion, then they've got control, because you have to go to them to know what's okay. You can't really know for sure. I think I can remember 312 things you can't do on the Sabbath. I can't remember the other 301. I need somebody to tell me. Complication, confusion, control. It is just like the United States tax code. Why is it so big? Why is it so fat? So that no one can know it all. So that you have to go to H&R Block, so that they've got control over you. Taxation is all about control. Beyond all that, back in Matthew 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, don't swear. Don't swear by anything. Don't swear by heaven. It's God's throne. Don't swear by yourself. You can't change the hair on your head from white to back to blonde. You've got no control. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no, and you're spared from all of this nonsense about knowing the proper protocols and rules and guidelines for that by which you're allowed to swear. Just tell the truth. Radical concept. We continue on. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin. And yes, those are spices. Same things we have today. Mint, dill, cumin. They're tiny little spices. Different parties of the Pharisees had debates and differences about whether you had to tithe of cumin or not. I'm not kidding. That's for real. They got down into this stupid minutia about nonsense. And I'm not saying that tithing and giving for the work of the church and supporting the temple and promoting the gospel and helping others, I'm not saying that that's not important. It is. It's biblical. It is a response of faith. But if you're spending time about whether you tithe cumin or not, then you're probably going to miss the important stuff. You'll neglect the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Pick a prophet, read through it. When you listen to the prophets, when you read them, look at those themes: justice, mercy, faithfulness. If you've got faithfulness, then you know what you're going to have. You know what's going to be manifest in your life. Mercy. You're going to have compassion on other people who struggle, other people who are financially destitute, because you understand they're your brothers, they're your sisters, they're struggling just like you. They struggle with their bills. They struggle with their own weakness. They struggle with their sin. And because God has mercy, chesed, undeserved kindness on you, you want to share that with them. And where there is faithfulness and where there is mercy, then there is justice. Justice. The fatherless won't be destitute and neglected. The widow, notice the theme, people who have no one to speak for them. It's no different now than it was then. The homeless, the fatherless, the orphan, the widow, the sick, the lonely, the elderly. They're going to be cared for. They're not going to be taken advantage of. That is a theme throughout the prophets, and it is a theme by which we need to evaluate ourselves. If you have faithfulness, if you're pursuing God and his truth, then mercy is going to be there, and you're going to care about justice. That will happen as a person, as a family, as a community, as a country. And you look at our country now, completely lacking faithfulness, and as a result, what is lacking? Mercy and justice. 60 to 80,000 children go missing a year, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. Nobody cares what's being done with them. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about the elderly. Really, they don't. Shove them off in a corner, put them in a home, leave them there. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. It's not that the other things don't matter. They're minutia in comparison with the big things. You blind guides straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. It all had cultural context. Yes, they had guidelines for how big of a bug you could strain out of a liquid and have it still be pure and not impure as regards ceremonial holiness and cleanness. And a gnat was okay, because it's almost impossible if you live in an agrarian society to keep gnats out of the wine. It's not going to happen. Just like today, the United States Food and Drug Administration has guidelines for how many bug parts can be in food. It's just the way it is. Food comes from farms. You can't keep out the bugs, but you could have a gnat and it was okay. So this connected with people and what they understood. Straining out the gnat, you're going the extra mile, straining out the gnat, but you're swallowing a camel. It was the biggest animal in Palestine. In that region of the world, a camel was the biggest thing. You're focusing on the little things and you're missing the big stuff. Don't miss the big stuff. Focus on the big stuff, the things that matter, faithfulness, mercy, and justice, and everything else will fall into place. Because if you're being faithful, you're also going to care about those things. But there is a matter of priority. The outside of the cup and the inside of the cup, make it look good. It's like the house that you keep clean and well tended on the outside, and inside it's like hoarders, right? And animals and whatever kind of stories that we see on the news. But what's on the inside, in this case, because he's talking to the Pharisees, is greed and self-indulgence. And the word for self-indulgence, the root comes from a word for booty, like you've the things that you've stolen from other people. It's all about you. It's all about self-aggrandizement and greed and selfishness. But the outside looks good. They've got the right robes on. The clothes are clean. They wash their feet when they come in from being outside. They have the house slave do that. But in their hearts, it's about what's in the heart. What's in the heart? What's in the heart? Because God sees what's in the heart. I was just reading through 1 Samuel again. When Samuel was sent to Jesse's house to look for the next king because Saul blew it. And he goes to Jesse's house, and Jesse's got these big strapping sons. And Samuel sees the first one. I think it's Eliab. And he goes, yeah, that's got to be him. And God says, no. You look at the outward appearance. I look at the heart. You look at the outside. I look at the inside. And what was it God loved about David? Who is David? The man after God's own heart. David was a veritable gold mine of adamant shortcomings in all kinds of ways. Read through 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, read through it. But he was faithful. He loved the Lord. Inside. First, clean the inside of the cup and the plate that the outside may also be clean. If you're taking care of the important stuff inside, what you're doing, the externals, they're going to fall in line with that. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs. Now, to us, we've got our ideas about graveyards, culturally scary places, whistling past the graveyard, kids going into the graveyard at midnight on a dare, whatever else, scary stuff. Wrong connotation, wrong cultural context for them. It was about cleanness. It was about cleanness. The Good Samaritan on the way to Jericho, the scribe and the priest, the Levite and the priest passed by on the other side. Why? Because he might be dead and he's bleeding. So you'll be unclean. If you touch something dead, you were ceremonially unclean for a week, period. And that had to do with otherness. God doesn't die. There were reasons for that. It's in the Old Testament. If you touch a dead body, you're ceremonially unclean for a week. Their idea of being around dead things, having dead things inside you, you're a whitewashed tomb inside, you're full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. See, uncleanness. That's what you're filled with. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. That's what that uncleanness really is. And that's another time he calls them hypocrites. I think I missed that one. That makes it, what is that, 6 or 7 times that he calls them hypocrites, because he says they're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. It's like telling the guy who is on his exercise bike all the time when he's not at the gym. He's got a 6-pack. He's perfectly fit. He's always working out. It's like telling him he's fat. These people, there's no way they could be lawless and full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. They considered themselves the paragon of keeping the law. But he tells them they're hypocrites and full of lawlessness. This is serious, strong stuff. Now, here at the end, I'm not going to go into the particulars. He's saying, I'll hit it real quick. There's so much we could cover here. From Abel, Cain killed Abel. First murder. Abel was righteous. Cain wasn't. Cain was mad at him. He killed him, struck him down with a rock out in the field. What Jesus is saying, and then you got Zechariah, son of Berechiah. It's probably the prophet Zechariah, but it could be the Zechariah who's mentioned in 2 Chronicles. You can go look this up. Pause and look it up. 2 Chronicles 2:20-24. Could be him, could be the prophet. There's no way for us to know. But basically bookends of all the righteous believers in the scriptures who were killed by those who were unrighteous. It was evil King Joash who had Zechariah killed, the one in 2 Chronicles, in the temple courts, had him murdered there. killing the faithful. Jesus told the story about the vineyard owner who sent his servants and then his son, and they killed them all. He's saying, you're just like your fathers who killed them. Why? Because you're doing the same thing. You're doing the same thing. He's pronouncing judgment on them in advance for killing him and for killing his disciples. Because you read through this, and I'm going to read this part again. You read through it and think the book of Acts. Think about what's coming yet in the book of Matthew and the other gospels, where Pontius Pilate, who was a wimp, but Pontius Pilate wanted to let him go. He knew he'd done nothing wrong. And they pushed and they pushed. If you let him go, you're no friend of Caesar's. All this stuff. Therefore, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues. Think of Paul. Think of the disciples in Acts 4 and Acts 5, and persecute from town to town. Read through the book of Acts and Paul's missionary journeys, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly, I say to you, all of these things will come upon this generation. And it all did in 70 AD. 70 AD, Titus, actually in 68 AD, Titus surrounded Jerusalem. They had rebelled one time too many, and they starved them out. And they built every siege weapon that they could think of, and they killed them all. God's judgment. And the temple came down. The temple had fulfilled its purpose. God now dwells in the temple that is his church. We are his temple. You are the temple of God, Paul says. But this judgment that is proclaimed here was fulfilled in 70 AD. He's condemning them in advance for all the things they were going to do. And we see that judgment fulfilled. Now, next time, we got to stop. Next time, we'll go on to his lament over Jerusalem. But you can't separate it, because nothing came between what I just read. All these things will come upon this generation. Then he goes into, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. He is pounded with the law. And he's going to talk about the gospel next. And there's so much in this one section, Matthew 23, 37 through 39. It's all we'll do next time, and we won't do it justice because there's so much here, so much to learn. So make sure and come back for the next installment. I want to thank you for listening. Go down below, hit that thumbs up, hit the like button. It makes a difference. It lets other people know that this teaching is worthwhile. Subscribe. And hey, when you subscribe, hit that notification bell. And that way you'll be made aware when I put out a new video. We're always putting out new videos. And share this video with someone else. Send it to somebody, put it out on your social media stream. And finally, drop by and pay us a visit here at our resource center, decodingthedeception.com. Take a look around, click on the different items up top. There's a whole lot here for you. We've got all kinds of Bible study resources and more for you here on our website. This is Matthias 76. Together, we have gone deep in the Word of God so that we are prepared in our own lives, in our own hearts, to decode the deception. God bless and have a great day.